The eviction notice came on a Wednesday morning, taped crookedly to the apartment door like a final insult. Sarah Bennett stared at it for a full minute before peeling it off, her fingers trembling. The bold letters, 15 days to vacate, burned into her vision as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. Inside, the air was stale with tension. Bills were scattered across the kitchen counter, unopened and multiplying like weeds. On the fridge hung a fading photo of her daughter Emma, beaming in her purple soccer jersey, 34 and already hanging on by a thread. Sarah hadn't always been in survival mode. Once, she'd had a promising career as an environmental engineer and a house in Kansas City. But then came the late-night arguments, the silent dinners, and finally, the day her husband packed up and left, saying he needed to find himself. That was 2 years ago. He'd vanished into the ether, leaving no address, no contact, and no child support. Emma was just 6 then. Now she was 8, smarter than she should be, and too used to watching her mother juggle 4 consulting jobs and bargain bin groceries. Sarah sank into the worn couch, the eviction notice fluttering from her lap like a white flag. She reached for her laptop, half hoping for a miracle in her inbox, an overdue payment from a client, a freelance gig, anything. Instead, she found a notice from her bank. Her last $2,700 had dropped to $2,452 after automatic deductions. In a moment of irrational desperation, she opened the county auction website. She'd bookmarked it months ago during one of her late-night what-if spirals. Abandoned homes, tax default properties, the kind of places people with nothing had to consider. One listing stood out. Clay County tax auction 15-acre farmstead with house and barn. Minimum bid, $2,000. Property sold as is. She clicked the link. The photos were grim gray siding, curling like dead bark. A roof that sagged under its own weight. A barn, half swallowed by overgrowth. The house sat on the edge of Pine Hollow, a rural spot an hour from Kansas City. She scanned the report. The previous owner, a man named Raymond Archer, had died over a decade ago. No heirs had claimed the property. It had sat empty since. Emma wandered into the living room, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Mom, why are you staring like that?" Sarah blinked, just thinking. "Are we going to have to move again?" Emma asked, voice small. Sarah hesitated. "Maybe, but what if we had a place of our own?" Emma perked up. "Like with trees in a garden? Can we have chickens?" "I don't know about chickens," Sarah said, forcing a smile, "but maybe something better." That night, after Emma went to bed, Sarah kept scrolling through the farm's listing. It wasn't much, but it was land. Freedom. No landlords, no rent. She knew nothing about plumbing or drywall, but she knew how to research, how to learn. By 2 a.m., she had read every article she could find on rural property restoration and off-grid living. The next morning, she dropped Emma at school, drove to the Clay County courthouse, and sat quietly in the back row of the auction room, her hands balled into fists. The room buzzed with investors and flippers, each eyeing maps and spreadsheets. But when the auctioneer called out, "Lot number 217 Pine Hollow Farmstead," the room went still. Opening bid at $2,000. Hall silence. Sarah raised her number. "Bidder 12, $2,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I hear 2,100? Nothing. Going once, going twice, sold, to bidder 12. Sarah barely registered the gavel's crack before the panic set in. Had she really just spent everything on a haunted-looking farmhouse? The clerk, a middle-aged woman with square glasses, slid over the deed. "The Anderson place, huh?" she muttered. "Nobody touches that land, not since the incident." Sarah frowned. "What incident?" The clerk shrugged. "Old man Archer, ex-military, kept to himself. Folks say weird things happened out there. Lights in the sky, government trucks. He died in that house, they say. Heart attack, supposedly. But I don't think anyone ever came to clean the place out, just disappeared." Sarah's stomach turned. She thought of Emma and the asthma, the city pollution, the late rent. She tucked the deed into her bag. "Thanks," she said, and tried to sound like someone not falling apart. They arrived 2 days later, the Honda groaning under a load of secondhand furniture and dreams barely stitched together. Emma gasped as the house came into view, a crooked 2-story skeleton of a home with shutters barely clinging to the windows and a chimney leaning just slightly left. "This is it?" she asked, wide-eyed. "It's a fixer-upper," Sarah said, trying not to wince, "but it's ours." The gravel driveway crunched beneath the tires as they pulled in. The barn loomed at the end of the field like a rusting sentinel. The yard was wild, grass up to her knees, tangled vines, a cracked birdbath tilted sideways. But the silence was beautiful. No sirens, no upstairs neighbors screaming at 2 a.m. They opened the door to the house with the skeleton key included in the auction packet. The air inside smelled of dust, mildew, and something sourer, like old wood and memories gone bad. Furniture remained, an overturned chair, a dusty upright piano with one broken key, a coat rack still holding a moth-eaten jacket. Sarah told Emma to wait by the stairs while she explored. The kitchen was small, with ancient appliances and warped linoleum. The faucet coughed when she tested it, and the pipes beneath moaned ominously. Still, it was solid, livable, with work. Later, while Emma napped on a pile of blankets in the living room, Sarah descended into the basement to check the water heater and fuse box. The stairs groaned like they'd rather collapse than support another human step. She flicked her flashlight across the room. Exposed pipes, a cracked concrete floor, shelves lined with rusted cans. Then her light landed on something strange. A section of the stone wall near the far corner had a long vertical crack down its center. Unlike the surrounding stones, these were cleaner, less aged, and tightly fitted. She rapped on it. Hollow. The sound echoed back, deep and metallic. She tapped again, this time lower. Same result. A hidden space? The hair on her arms prickled. She backed away slowly, the flashlight beam trembling. Emma's voice rang from upstairs. "Mom, it's getting dark." "Coming," she called back, her voice a little too loud. Sarah climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her heart thudding. She forced a smile as she stepped into the living room, brushing dirt off her hands. "Let's have dinner," she said, "and tomorrow we'll start making this place feel like home." But even as Emma nodded, Sarah's mind stayed rooted in the basement, in that hollow echo inside the stone wall. This wasn't just an old house. Something else lived here once, maybe still did. Sarah stood at the edge of the cracked stone wall, the cellar's damp air pressing around her like a warning. Her fingers traced the uneven mortar between the stones again. The hollow knock she'd heard the night before echoed in her memory like a whispered challenge. She'd hardly slept. That sound, the emptiness behind it, had gnawed at her all night. Something was hidden down here. And now, in the morning light filtered through the dusty cellar window, she was determined to find out what. She picked up the old crowbar she'd found in the barn and inserted it carefully between the loose stones. With a grunt, she leaned her weight into it. The stone gave a reluctant groan before shifting outward. A draft of cooler air slipped through the opening. She stepped back, heart thudding. This wasn't just a storage cavity, this was something bigger. Carefully, Sarah pried at the edges until a section of the wall, nearly 4 feet wide, pivoted inward like a door. A waft of stale metallic air poured out. She froze. Beyond the opening, a tunnel stretched into darkness, the walls reinforced with concrete and lined with rusted conduit. She reached for her flashlight and aimed it down the passage. The beam disappeared into the black, swallowed up by the tunnel's slow, downward slope. Emma's not going to believe this, she whispered to herself, though her gut warned her to keep this secret for now. She stepped inside. The concrete floor felt solid beneath her boots. A few feet in, she found an old panel wired to the wall, likely once a control station. The light from her flashlight glinted off a plaque, half buried in grime. She brushed at it with her sleeve. Captain R. Archer, Blue Delta Facility. Her breath caught. Archer, the name the county clerk had mentioned, the reclusive officer who used to own the property. Apparently, he hadn't just been a hermit with prepper tendencies, he had run something official, something military. She pressed deeper into the tunnel. After 20 yards or so, it opened into a wider space, an underground complex, larger than she'd imagined. The main room had the look of a forgotten command post. Rusted filing cabinets lined the walls. A communications console, outdated but recognizable, sat in one corner. Rotary dials, cracked switches, and cables like veins running across the floor. A second chamber revealed a crude dormitory, bunk beds, dusty blankets, and a metal locker with faded stenciling. The remnants of human presence lingered in the stale air. Sarah opened one of the filing cabinets. Inside were binders thick with yellowed paper, most labeled with cryptic abbreviations, UAP logs, soil R Delta, exposure reports. She didn't understand the terminology, but she understood their age. These hadn't been touched in years. On a metal desk bolted to the far wall, she found something stranger. A palm-sized black device, smooth and matte, with no screen or buttons, just a single magnetic strip along one edge. Next to it lay a thin rectangular fob, possibly a key card, though heavier than it looked. Attached was a small tag labeled Level 3, Access Alpha. Sarah slipped both into her backpack. Just as she turned to leave, a red indicator light blinked on a wall-mounted panel, brief, then gone. She stared at it for a moment, wondering if she'd imagined it. Maybe some ancient battery cell still held a charge, or maybe something had detected movement. Either way, it was time to go. The climb back up the tunnel felt longer on the return. She resealed the stone door behind her and stacked boxes in front to conceal the seam. Her hands were shaking. She'd uncovered a secret facility, military, maybe Cold War era, beneath her property, and no one had told her. Back upstairs, Emma was playing with a coloring book in the living room. "Did you find anything cool in the basement, Mom?" Sarah smiled thinly. "Just old junk, some old wiring and empty shelves, nothing exciting." She didn't want to lie, but she wasn't about to share words like underground base and military files with her 8-year-old. That afternoon, Sarah ventured outside to clear her head. The air was crisp, and the tall grass behind the barn shimmered under the late morning sun. As she reached the gravel drive near the gate, she stopped. A black SUV was parked just beyond the edge of her property line. It wasn't moving. No engine noise. No license plate. Sarah squinted, heart pounding. Then, just as quickly as she noticed it, the vehicle pulled away, tires crunching gravel as it turned, and vanished down the road without so much as a wave. She stood frozen, her skin prickling. The SUV wasn't local, and it had been watching the house. Sarah walked back inside and locked the doors. Then she pulled the strange keycard from her backpack and turned it over in her hand. Something told her that opening that hidden door had started a clock she couldn't yet see. Whatever Blue Delta was, it wasn't abandoned, and she had just stepped into its shadow. The sound of tires on gravel broke the early morning stillness like a warning shot. Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, still half asleep, nursing a cup of black coffee as the sun broke low over the fields. From the window above the sink, she caught sight of them, 3 black SUVs rolling down her long dirt driveway in perfect formation, their dark exteriors glinting with the cold authority of something that didn't belong. No license plates, no dust kicked up from hesitation, just purpose. She put her mug down, her hand suddenly clammy. "Emma," she called over her shoulder, trying to sound casual. "Stay in your room for a bit, okay?" Her daughter, still wrapped in a fleece blanket and half lost in a morning cartoon, looked up and nodded. "Is someone here?" "Just stay put, please." By the time Sarah stepped onto the front porch, the vehicles had stopped a few yards from her porch steps. The doors opened in unison, and 6 figures emerged, 4 in dark tactical gear and 2 in plain clothes. Leading the group was a tall woman in her late 40s, with a crisp military posture and steel gray hair tied back in a severe bun. She wore no name tag, no insignia, just a slim folder in one hand and a look of control in her eyes. "Ms. Sarah Bennett," the woman asked. Sarah folded her arms tightly. "Who are you?" "Major Evelyn Drake, United States Air Force. This property contains a site of former federal interest. We're here to conduct a security assessment." Sarah hesitated. "There must be some mistake. This land was sold at auction. I have the deed. We're aware. The auction should not have taken place. The site beneath your home was not fully decommissioned. Drake opened the folder and extended a document. This is a temporary national security directive authorizing inspection. You're not under investigation, but I need full access to the property. Sarah scanned the document. It was legitimate looking. Lots of seals, signatures, and acronyms. No time to verify. No option to say no. She stepped aside. Drake nodded, motioning to the others. Two of the tactical officers moved toward the barn, one toward the house. Another pair disappeared around back, toward the cellar. Inside, Sarah sat rigidly on the couch, trying not to look like she was shaking. Emma peeked out from the hallway. Mom? It's okay, baby. Just go back to your room. Drake walked slowly around the living room, her eyes skimming the surfaces, absorbing details. You opened the hatch, she said calmly. Sarah didn't answer. We know. Sensors inside the facility activated after nearly a decade of dormancy. You're not the first to find something you weren't supposed to, but you may be the first to find it completely by accident. Why was it hidden? What was Captain Archer doing under my house? Drake didn't blink. Captain Archer oversaw a Cold War-era surveillance station with specialized atmospheric monitoring protocols. The specifics remain classified. What matters is that the facility was never fully cleared. Certain items were not recovered. Sarah swallowed. Like what? Drake met her gaze. That's what we intend to determine. Hours passed in tense silence as the team scoured the property. Sarah watched them come and go in patterns. Voices muffled, commands exchanged in clipped tones. One of the plainclothes men, younger, with close-cropped dark hair and an unnervingly still demeanor, introduced himself only once. Agent Grant, Department of Defense Liaison. That was all he said, but she noticed he never took his eyes off her. By late afternoon, Drake returned to the living room. She placed another document on the coffee table. Non-disclosure agreement, standard procedure. Sarah looked at the paper. What if I don't sign? Drake didn't smile. Then your ownership of this property becomes a legal matter. You won't be charged, but you also won't be living here. Sarah took the pen. Just as she signed her name, Emma's voice carried faintly down the hall. Mom, what's a recovery protocol? Drake's head turned sharply. Sarah stood. She's just a kid, don't. But it was too late. Agent Grant had already moved toward the hallway. Sarah followed quickly. Emma stood at the edge of the staircase, holding a book she'd grabbed from the floor, one of Archer's old field manuals Sarah had left on a side table. She looked confused, not scared. They said they were looking for something he left behind, Emma said quietly. Something dangerous. Drake knelt slightly, eye level with the child. Her voice was gentler than Sarah expected. We're just making sure everything is safe now, sweetheart. For you and your mom. Emma nodded slowly, but Sarah saw it. The child's growing awareness that adults weren't telling the whole truth. That night, after the SUVs had disappeared down the road and the dusk had settled thickly over the farmland, Sarah sat by the front window, watching the stillness. The place looked unchanged, but it didn't feel unchanged. Emma joined her on the couch. Are they gone? For now, Sarah said. Were they mad at us? I think they were mad at the past, not at us. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then, Mom, what did Captain Archer leave behind? Sarah didn't answer. She didn't know. Not yet. But she was going to find out, even if she had to dig through every inch of that land to do it. The next morning, Sarah awoke before sunrise, her mind still spinning from the events of the previous day. The signed non-disclosure agreement lay folded on the dining table, a stark reminder that whatever she'd stepped into, it was bigger than she imagined. The visit from Major Evelyn Drake had shifted something inside her, a quiet, burning need to understand what Captain Archer had been protecting beneath this land, and why. After dropping Emma off at school, Sarah returned to the farmhouse alone. She brewed a pot of coffee, grabbed a flashlight, and headed back into the underground facility. This time, her steps were purposeful. The air was cool and still, and the silence wrapped around her like a heavy coat. She bypassed the radio equipment and sleeping quarters, instead moving toward the far wall where she'd noticed a decorative wooden panel that looked oddly out of place the day before. Kneeling down, she tapped the edge of the panel. It echoed faintly, different from the solid concrete around it. Using a flathead screwdriver, she gently pried it loose. Behind it, nestled between the wall studs, was a small steel box wrapped in aging canvas. Her heart pounded as she slid it out and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a worn, leather-bound journal, its spine creased and stained with time. On the front, in faded ink, were the initials R.A. She opened it slowly, revealing pages upon pages of tightly written entries, sketches, and diagrams. The dates began in 1982. June 3rd, 1982. First anomaly detected. Bright orb over East Field. Moved against wind. No sound. Radar showed nothing. Sarah read on, entranced. Captain Archer hadn't just been maintaining a forgotten Cold War bunker. He had been cataloging unexplained aerial phenomena for decades, the kind of work that would be dismissed by skeptics, but was detailed here with scientific precision. He documented fluctuations in magnetic fields, changes in soil chemistry, and behavioral shifts in local wildlife after each event. There were temperature anomalies, unexplained electromagnetic pulses, and audio recordings of sounds too high-pitched for human ears. March 11th, 1994. Encounter lasted 43 seconds. Craft hovered silently. No visible propulsion. Flora within 30-foot radius bloomed out of season 3 days later. Sarah flipped forward to an entry dated 2009. They warned me not to dig too deep, metaphorically and otherwise. But this land is speaking. Something beneath the soil reacts to them. Not every visit is visual. Sometimes it's the ground that answers back. Tucked into the back cover was a folded map. She opened it carefully, revealing the layout of the 15-acre farm, marked with a series of X's. Each X was annotated with dates and short notes. August 1990 soil spike, June 1997 EM distortion, September 2005 aerial triad. At the bottom of the map, scribbled in faded red pen, was one line, post-contact bioactivation zone. Sarah exhaled slowly, the meaning sinking in. Archer believed the land itself had been altered by repeated contact with something. Something beyond explanation. And maybe he wasn't wrong. She thought of the strange resilience of the weeds, the odd hum that sometimes filled the air at dusk, the way birds seemed to circle a particular tree line and never cross it. She returned to the main room and sat at Archer's old desk, spreading out the map and notebook. The farmhouse groaned above her, a reminder that time hadn't stopped for either of them. Grabbing a fresh notebook from her backpack, Sarah began to write. Observation log. Day 1. Following Archer's markings, I will monitor the designated zones, not just for electromagnetic shifts, but for changes in soil, air quality, plant life, and wildlife behavior. That evening, she and Emma walked the edge of the property, just like they'd done their first day. But this time, Sarah paid closer attention. The rustling in the corn that hadn't been planted in years. The way the grass grew taller in patches without sun. The old scarecrow leaning slightly toward the barn, despite no wind. Back inside, while Emma colored at the table, Sarah entered Archer's data into a spreadsheet on her laptop. It would take days to cross-reference everything, but she was already seeing patterns. And just before bed, she noted something else. The humming was back. Not from the house, not from any electrical appliance, from the earth. Some legacies aren't left in money or land. Some are buried deeper, waiting for the right hands to unearth them. The rain came unexpectedly that morning, a thin drizzle clinging to the windows like breath. Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, watching rivulets streak down the glass, as Emma quietly ate a bowl of cereal at the table behind her. The strange growth patterns in the garden had unnerved her more than she admitted. It wasn't just that the seeds had sprouted fast. It was how they grew in symmetry, in precision, in patterns that seemed intentional. She turned from the window and pulled a Ziploc bag from the fridge. Inside were several samples of soil she had dug from different spots around the property. Each was labeled with the date and location. One was from the garden bed, another from near the old apple tree. The last one from the clearing at the forest's edge, where she had noticed moss that glowed faintly under the moonlight. She didn't have the tools to analyze them herself, but she remembered Archer's mention of a contact, someone with a scientific background who had helped him discreetly. She had read the name scrawled in the back of his journal, Chen. The only match she found was Dr. Marcus Chen, a soil biologist at the University of Missouri with a focus on agricultural resilience. She mailed the samples with a handwritten note, not disclosing the full story, only that she suspected anomalous chemical balances and microbial activity. She signed it with her name and phone number in case he had questions. 5 days passed. In that time, more strange things occurred. She watched a young sapling regrow 2 inches overnight after she had clipped it back. Weeds pulled from the base of the porch returned by morning. Water usage was minimal, yet the plants remained lush, even during a short heat wave. Sarah began to sleep with a notebook beside her bed, jotting down times, weather conditions, and observations. On the 6th morning, her phone rang at 6:42 a.m. The number was unfamiliar, but she picked up quickly. "Miss Bennett," the voice was measured but alert. "This is Dr. Marcus Chen. I received your samples. I need to see the property in person." Sarah's pulse ticked up. "Is something wrong?" Chen paused. "Let's just say what I found isn't natural. I'd like to meet. Today, if possible." They agreed to meet at his greenhouse lab near the university. Sarah dropped Emma off at a friend's house and made the 2-hour drive with a growing pit in her stomach. The research facility was a small, sun-drenched compound tucked behind a line of trees. Inside, it smelled of damp leaves and ozone. Dr. Chen met her at the entrance, dressed in jeans and a lab coat, his hair graying at the temples, but eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. "I ran a full profile," he said, leading her past rows of experimental plots. "The nitrogen levels are off the charts. Microbial activity is accelerated. Certain beneficial fungi I've only seen in specially treated soils showed up in abundance. But there's more. There's something I can't explain." He gestured to a sealed glass enclosure. Inside were 3 pots, each with seedlings grown from her soil samples. One had exploded in size in under 48 hours. That seed was untreated. We used a control for everything, but it grew like it had been genetically enhanced. Sarah looked at him. "Can soil do that?" "Not like this, and not on its own." He opened a folder and showed her a printed scan of one of the bacterial colonies under a microscope. "See these structures? They're symmetrical, organized, and they're producing compounds that mimic known plant growth hormones, except these aren't found in any database I know." Sarah hesitated, then reached into her tote and pulled out Archer's map, the one with the red circles and notes about post-exposure biological activation. Chen studied it with increasing intensity. "These points, are they locations on your property?" "Yes, I haven't visited them all, but I found this in a sealed room under the farmhouse. Archer believed something changed the land, that there were contact events." Chen didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he tapped a spot near the northeast corner of the map. "This one, it's closest to a geological anomaly I've studied before. Magnetic readings spiked there 10 years ago, but we never found a cause. I think we should go." They made plans to meet again the next day. That night, Sarah lay awake, thinking not of military threats or government secrecy, but of the ground beneath her feet. How many secrets did it hold? Had Archer really stumbled upon something alien? And if the Earth itself was now altered by that contact, what else had it absorbed? As lightning flashed in the distance and the sky rumbled low and heavy, Sarah wrote one last entry in her notebook before turning out the light. "The land is alive, not just growing, watching." The morning air hung thick with dew as Sarah tightened the laces on her boots and slung the old canvas backpack over her shoulder. Marcus stood by the edge of the tree line behind the farmhouse, uncharacteristically quiet, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his windbreaker. "Are you sure it's this way?" he asked, eyeing the hand-drawn map Sarah held. "As sure as anyone can be about a 30-year-old sketch found behind a false wall," Sarah replied, giving him a look that blended nerves and determination. They had waited for Emma to leave on the school bus before setting out. Sarah didn't want her daughter anywhere near what they were about to uncover. The map from Archer's journal had marked several locations, but one in particular stood out, a red X encircled and annotated primary deposit, unmoved. The woods behind the property were dense but familiar now. Sarah had walked them many times since moving in, though always with a cautious eye and a creeping feeling she was never entirely alone. Today, though, that feeling was a weight pressing against her ribs. They walked in silence until Marcus stopped suddenly and pointed. "There," he said, stepping toward a half-buried square of rusted steel in the underbrush. It was a hatch, a rectangular steel plate about 3 feet wide, obscured by years of leaves and moss. A small keyhole was inset at its center, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Sarah pulled the electronic key she'd found in Archer's desk from her coat pocket. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted it. It clicked. With a low hiss, a hydraulic mechanism groaned to life beneath the hatch. The steel lid rose slowly, revealing a reinforced concrete compartment no larger than a suitcase. Inside, cushioned in protective foam, sat 2 objects: a smooth metallic cylinder and a matte black device that looked like a futuristic hard drive. Marcus let out a low whistle. "That doesn't look like any military archive box I've ever seen." "Let's not stay out here with it longer than we have to," Sarah said. "Help me close this." They secured the hatch, brushed away their footprints as best they could, and hurried back to the farmhouse, adrenaline pushing them forward. Once inside, Sarah cleared the kitchen table and laid the objects out on a clean towel. The cylinder was cold to the touch, smooth and seamless, about the size of a thermos. No buttons, no markings. The black device had a port that matched a recessed socket on the bottom of the cylinder. Marcus hesitated. "If this is what I think it is, we might be about to cross a line that people in dark suits tend to notice." "We already crossed it the day I opened that bunker," Sarah replied. She connected the 2 devices. Nothing happened at first. Then a pulse of soft blue light emitted from the top of the cylinder, projecting an image into the air above the table. They both stepped back, stunned. It was a 3-dimensional star map, rotating slowly, with dozens of systems marked in various colors. Some bore glyph-like symbols, others blinked as if signaling attention. That looks like a navigation chart," Marcus said, eyes wide. "Those coordinates aren't in any publicly available star catalog, not ours." Sarah pointed to a highlighted region near the center. "Why would Archer have hidden something like this?" "Because he knew what he found," Marcus said slowly. "Or at least, he knew it didn't belong to us." They watched in silence as the map looped through a series of constellation overlays, then faded to black. The room felt colder when the light disappeared. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. This isn't just data. This is proof. And if that soil analysis we ran is any indication, something, or someone, has already been affecting the land." Sarah sat down hard in the nearest chair. "What do we do with it?" "For now, we keep it safe, and we document everything, especially what happens next." They spent the next few hours photographing the devices, taking careful notes, and moving the items to a hidden compartment in the farmhouse attic, an area even the military hadn't touched. By dusk, Sarah was outside watering the small vegetable patch Emma had planted. She was thinking about dinner, the star map, the symbols she didn't understand, and the weight of what she and Marcus had discovered. She didn't notice the change in the air until the crickets stopped. A faint vibration moved through the ground, a subtle shift, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. She looked up just as a soft, shimmering light appeared above the treetops to the north. Not a beam, not quite, more like a veil descending in slow motion. Sarah froze. The light pulsed and contracted until it formed a sphere, about 20 feet across, hovering silently above the garden. Her mouth went dry. Her limbs refused to move. Then the sphere emitted a cone of soft white-blue light that bathed the garden plot where Emma had planted carrot seeds just 3 days ago. The light lasted no more than 30 seconds. Then, just as silently as it had arrived, the sphere receded into the sky, vanishing behind the clouds without a sound. Sarah stood rooted in place, her heart racing. Somehow, she knew this was no random event. The garden, Emma's garden, had been deliberately chosen. She looked down at the soil, now glowing faintly with a warmth she could feel but not see. Whatever Archer had been tracking, it was still here, and it had just responded. Sarah stood barefoot in the dewy grass, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, as the pre-dawn chill settled over the fields. The farm was quiet, almost reverent. Emma was still asleep, curled up inside the farmhouse, unaware that her mother had been up most of the night watching the skies. But Sarah hadn't been idle. The infrared camera, rigged to her tripod and aimed directly at the garden, had captured everything. The lights, the hovering, the pulse of bluish-white energy that danced silently above the rows where Emma had planted her seeds just hours earlier. No noise, no hum of an engine, no rotor wash. The object had moved with impossible smoothness, like it was sliding through a layer of the world that no one else could access. Sarah had nearly dropped the camera when it first appeared, just a shimmer of movement at the edge of the tree line. Then the glow intensified, spread out like ripples over water, before narrowing into a single focused beam. It held there, motionless over the garden for what felt like forever, before blinking out like a candle, snuffed by invisible fingers. Sarah had watched the playback twice before sunrise, just to make sure she hadn't hallucinated the entire thing. But it was there, crystal clear. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The footage gave her chills. By mid-morning, the garden was unrecognizable. Tomato plants that had only begun to flower the day before now bore clusters of red fruit. The squash vines had doubled in length. The carrots Emma had so lovingly tucked into the dirt had already pushed up delicate fronds that swayed in the breeze. Sarah knelt in disbelief, brushing her hand gently across the tops of the vegetables. "This isn't possible," she whispered, but the evidence was in front of her. "Mom, look at my beans." Emma's voice came from behind her, bright with excitement. The little girl ran barefoot through the yard, her pajamas already smeared with garden soil. "They weren't here yesterday," she said, crouching down beside a row of stalks that had appeared almost overnight. "I think the aliens helped." Sarah looked at her daughter, startled. "Why do you say that?" Emma shrugged. "They came last night, right? Like Captain Archer wrote in the notebook. The star people. I dreamed about them." Sarah didn't know what to say. The line between reality and fantasy had started to blur at an alarming rate, and now even her child seemed swept into the current. She forced a smile. "Maybe they did," she said, ruffling Emma's hair. "Let's just call it a good growing night." But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Later that afternoon, Sarah got a call from Emma's elementary school. The principal, Ms. Karen Stokes, sounded polite but wary. "I was wondering if you could come in this afternoon for a quick meeting. It's about something Emma shared during class." Sarah's stomach twisted. When she arrived at the school, Ms. Stokes greeted her in the front office and ushered her into a side room with frosted windows. "First of all," the principal began, "Emma's doing wonderfully here. She's bright, curious, and polite. But today she told her teacher, and the entire class actually, that aliens came to her farm last night and made her vegetables grow." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I know children have vivid imaginations," Ms. Stokes continued gently, "but we're a little concerned. Sometimes, when kids express unusual stories, it can be a sign that they're under stress, or struggling to process something they've overheard." "She's not under stress," Sarah said a little too quickly. "She's just excited. We moved to a new place. She's playing outside more. Her asthma is better. Maybe she's just dreaming big." Ms. Stokes nodded slowly. "We just want to be sure she feels secure. And if there's anything unusual happening at home—" "There isn't," Sarah interrupted. "Thank you for your concern, but she's fine. We both are." The meeting ended awkwardly, and Sarah drove home, feeling watched, not just by the school, but by something unseen. The unease that had crept in last night was still there, now growing roots. As she pulled into the driveway, she stopped the car abruptly. Above the barn, suspended in the late afternoon haze, was a black object, small, sleek, and utterly silent. A drone. She stepped out of the car slowly, shielding her eyes against the sun. The drone didn't move. It hovered about 30 feet above the ground, its matte body reflecting nothing. No blinking lights, no identifiers. And then it zipped upward in a smooth, impossibly fast motion and vanished into the clouds. Sarah stood motionless, heart pounding. Someone was watching. Someone knew. She ran into the house, bolted the door, and checked the camera footage from her garden. The drone had not shown up on the infrared, but a static burst had glitched the recording at exactly the moment it appeared. Someone had jammed the signal. She went back to the basement that night and stared at the metal case with the alien map. They knew she had it, and now she was certain. Others knew too. Sarah tightened her grip on Archer's journal and looked at the back page again. They watch the land, but someone always watches them too. She read it out loud and felt a shiver run down her spine. The next move would be hers, but she wasn't playing checkers anymore. This was something much bigger, and it had only just begun. The morning after the drone sighting, Sarah awoke with a sense of something unfinished. The skies above Bennett Farm had returned to their muted blue, but in her chest, the quiet throb of unease persisted. The encrypted folder Marcus had copied from the alien hard drive still lay unopened on her desktop. The garden continued to grow at a baffling pace, and most of all, she couldn't stop thinking about the second mark on Archer's map. It was buried beneath an old tool shed beyond the orchard, a structure half collapsed from rot and disuse. Sarah had ignored it for weeks, dismissing it as just another item on the long list of things to demolish someday. But now, after the lights in the sky, it called to her. "Marcus," she said over the phone, eyes fixed on the distant, crooked roofline of the shed. "I think we missed something." He didn't ask her to clarify. "I'll be there in an hour." The shed creaked ominously as Sarah and Marcus circled it that afternoon, their boots crunching over fallen apples and weeds. Most of the structure had caved in from years of neglect, the wooden floorboards warped and soft beneath their feet. "This thing looks like it's one good gust away from collapse," Marcus muttered, peering down through a broken slat. "But if Archer marked this spot, there's a reason." They worked methodically, clearing tools and debris, pulling up the old floorboards one by one. About an hour in, Sarah's crowbar struck metal with a hollow, unnatural clang. Her eyes met Marcus's. They tore the rest of the planks free, revealing a rectangular steel hatch barely larger than a crawlspace access panel. It was flush with the ground, sealed with bolts and a recessed latch that bore the faint, familiar stamp. Blue Delta Facility, Secondary Compartment 2A. "This doesn't look like a storm shelter," Marcus said quietly. Sarah nodded. "Number, it's a vault." She retrieved the same keycard they'd used in the forest cache. To her astonishment, it slid into a narrow slot beside the latch. A low mechanical whir followed, then a click. The door popped upward half an inch. They exchanged a glance. Marcus exhaled slowly. "After you." The chamber below was colder than the tunnel beneath the farmhouse, more sterile, somehow. A short steel ladder descended into a tight room, illuminated by a single still-functioning emergency light. Sarah descended first, stepping onto a metal grate floor. Around her were racks of reinforced shelving, each lined with sealed containers, canisters, and file boxes. At the far end sat a small terminal with a biometric scanner. "Jesus," Marcus whispered behind her. "He built a data vault." Sarah moved to the first box. Inside were clear canisters holding sealed soil samples, each labeled with coordinates, dates, and cryptic notes like post-exposure bloom phase or Delta variant, retains activity after isolation. "Marcus," she said, holding one up. He wasn't just cataloging effects, he was experimenting. Marcus was already at the terminal. It had no keyboard, just a palm reader and a small screen, flickering dimly. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a universal interface kit, quietly mumbling to himself. "If this thing is running on Cold War tech, I might be able to spoof the handprint scan." A moment later, the screen blinked awake. Files unfurled across the screen like the pages of a diary. Botanical genome mapping, enhanced mineral conduction, atmospheric absorption analysis. Each one packed with charts, scanned documents, infrared imagery, and annotations in Archer's unmistakable handwriting. One folder caught Sarah's attention. Personal unsent. She opened it. There it was. A single unsent email, addressed to an encrypted contact string, written in a mixture of urgency and resignation. "If you're reading this, I've either been silenced or I ran out of time. They think they've confiscated everything, but this vault holds the real story. The soil is no longer Earth standard. We're living on land they've modified, maybe even planted. We're standing on ground they chose. Sarah stared at the screen, heart hammering. They. What do you think he meant? She asked. Marcus didn't look up. That someone, or something, has been altering this environment for years, and the government knew. He pointed to a digital model of a DNA sequence on the screen, one with distinct non-terrestrial markers. This, he said, voice hushed, this isn't anything that's ever evolved on Earth. Back at the farmhouse, the sun had started to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the garden. Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest. The night was coming fast, and with it, more questions. Emma ran up from the garden, her small arms full of cherry tomatoes. Mom, look how red they got. I swear they were green this morning. Sarah forced a smile. That's amazing, sweetie. She didn't tell Emma about the vault, or the email, or the implications that kept crawling through her thoughts like ants under skin. She didn't mention how Archer's notes implied intent, that the changes to the land weren't just accidents of exposure or natural adaptation, but calculated, that someone, or something, had been preparing this place for something else. After Emma went to bed, Sarah returned to the vault alone. She and Marcus had resealed it, but the glow of the emergency lights still haunted her thoughts. She replayed the email in her head over and over again. We're standing on ground they chose. The words echoed into her dreams that night, mixing with visions of lights in the sky and roots spreading beneath the earth, glowing with something not quite human. And for the first time, Sarah wasn't sure if she was still the one in control of her own land. The letter came without warning. No postage, no return address. Just a stark manila envelope slid beneath Sarah's front door as the sun rose over the Bennett farm. She found it lying askew on the welcome mat when she went to check on the garden. Her name was written in block letters across the front in black ink, all caps, Sarah Bennett. Inside was a folded sheet of white paper bearing a Department of Defense letterhead and a single sentence in formal clipped language. You are hereby ordered to report to Fort Granger Regional Command Center, 9 a.m. Thursday, under Section 42G of the National Security Compliance Act. Below, it was signed, Major Evelyn Drake. Her stomach turned cold. She stood on the porch for several minutes, heart hammering, trying to decide whether to wake Emma or pretend none of this had happened. But there was no unknowing now, no going back. At exactly 9 a.m., Sarah pulled into a heavily guarded facility 2 hours south of the farm. The guards barely looked at her ID before waving her through, as if they'd been expecting her for a long time. The security felt different from anything she'd ever experienced, not airport pat-downs or courthouse metal detectors. This was the kind of place that didn't show up on civilian maps, where the rules were written in silence. She was escorted down a long, fluorescent-lit corridor and into a narrow debriefing room. It was windowless and cold, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs that looked like they belonged in an interrogation scene. Waiting inside were 2 figures she recognized instantly. Major Evelyn Drake was dressed in a dark blue Air Force uniform, crisp and adorned with insignia that seemed to glint under the sterile lights. She stood beside Agent Noah Grant, who wore the same blank expression as the last time she saw him, like a shadow attached to a badge. Ms. Bennett, Drake began without preamble, motioning for her to sit. We appreciate your punctuality. Sarah took her seat but didn't respond. Her hands remained in her lap, clenched tightly. Drake placed a manila folder on the table between them and opened it with deliberate care. Inside were photographs, grainy infrared images that showed the barn, the garden, and what looked disturbingly like a still of Sarah and Marcus examining the star map in her living room. You violated your non-disclosure agreement, Drake said coolly, sliding a photo toward her. You've been handling unauthorized technology, recording unexplained aerial events, and storing classified materials on civilian property. Would you like to respond before we proceed? Sarah met her eyes. I haven't gone public. Grant leaned forward, speaking for the first time. But you will. That's the pattern. First the exploration, then the curiosity, then the leak. Captain Archer did the same thing. He just got ahead of his handlers. Drake cut in again. We're not here to argue ethics, Ms. Bennett. We're here to present a way out, for you and your daughter. We want the star map, the data cores, and the genetic samples. All of it. In return, we offer protection, relocation, financial security. You'll walk away with a clean record. No prosecution, no late-night visits, no more eyes in the sky. Sarah didn't flinch. And if I say no, Drake didn't blink. Then you are in violation of federal code, and we will pursue legal and strategic remedies accordingly. A silence settled in the room, heavy and sharp. Then Sarah leaned forward. You're standing on land that's changing. It's not just dirt anymore. It's a threshold. And if this is a border between two worlds, then someone needs to stand at the gate. Drake arched an eyebrow. You consider yourself that person? Sarah didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for it, but neither did Archer. Maybe the land chooses who it needs. Grant looked toward Drake, clearly unsettled, but the Major remained composed. She nodded once to her subordinate, then turned back to Sarah. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Not now, not today, but soon. Then we'll deal with that day when it comes, Sarah said, rising from her chair. They didn't stop her when she walked out. The escort waited silently at the end of the hallway, returning her to the parking lot without a word. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel, but she didn't start the car. Not yet. She needed a moment to ground herself. Outside, a pair of jets screamed overhead, carving contrails into the blue sky. She watched them fade into the distance and felt something resolve inside her. The road ahead would be dangerous, possibly reckless, but she couldn't hand over what Archer died protecting, and she couldn't leave Emma's future in the hands of people who saw her only as collateral. That night, the farm felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. She and Emma had dinner by candlelight. The power had flickered off twice that afternoon, and Sarah didn't trust the surge. Emma was in good spirits, talking about a new friend she'd made at school and how their science teacher let her bring in soil from the garden for an experiment. I told him it made things grow super fast, Emma said proudly. He didn't believe me, but Ms. Harris did. She said our tomato looked like it came from Mars. Sarah managed a small smile, but her nerves hadn't stopped buzzing since she left the base. Around 1 a.m., she was still awake, eyes scanning through the security camera feeds on her laptop. The infrared overlay made everything glow faintly silver. The barn, the garden, the woods. Then she saw it. Motion. On camera, 3, near the back fence. A figure in black, moving low and quick across the field. Her heart leapt into her throat. She reached for the emergency remote on the nightstand and pressed the alarm trigger. Outside, the old siren Archer had installed decades ago roared to life, an ear-piercing shriek that shattered the night's stillness. Emma burst into the hallway moments later, clutching her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed but silent. Stay with me, Sarah whispered, grabbing the flashlight and leading her daughter to the crawl space behind the pantry. She'd turned it into a makeshift safe room weeks ago just in case. Outside, footsteps pounded the ground, followed by a loud rustling and then nothing. By the time the local sheriff's cruiser arrived 20 minutes later, the intruder was long gone. The deputy took a report, shined a flashlight through the trees, and told her the cameras would help with identification. But Sarah knew better. Whoever had come wasn't an amateur, and they hadn't come to steal a tractor. They came for what the government hadn't found, and they would be back. As the cruiser pulled away and silence returned, Sarah stood on the porch, barefoot in the dewy grass, watching the horizon. The lines were being drawn. She could feel it, between those who wanted to bury the truth and those who were willing to risk everything to bring it to light. She looked down at the earth beneath her feet. This land chose me, she thought, and she wasn't walking away. The sky over Bennett Farm was unusually still that morning, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, fingers trembling slightly as she hovered over the trackpad of her laptop. The video was queued up, night vision footage taken from the barn's observation loft. It showed the unmistakable dance of lights in the northern sky, culminating in a single orb descending and bathing her garden in that strange bluish-white glow. She had edited out Emma's voice and digitally scrubbed any identifying audio. Her face was never shown. It had taken hours to anonymize the file, but it was done. A click of the mouse and the footage would upload to a private server set up by Marcus's contacts, scientists from various universities who had begun quietly assembling behind the scenes. Sarah stared at the upload button for a long moment. Then she clicked. The file transferred silently. No fanfare, no alarms. But Sarah knew that the world she had once clung to, the quiet anonymity of being a single mom in a forgotten county, was about to vanish. By noon, the video had gone viral. It was first picked up on a Reddit thread for amateur astronomers. Then it made its way to a physics forum. Within 6 hours, major independent science YouTube channels were dissecting it frame by frame. Unexplained aerial interaction or military experiment? One headline asked. Mother captures unprecedented evidence. Hoax or hidden truth? Another declared. Sarah didn't check comments. She knew better. Instead, she monitored the growing email chain between Marcus and a handful of academics, cryptographers, and environmental scientists. They were combing through the supplemental data she had provided, soil samples, growth records, and atmospheric readings taken during the sightings. And one by one, they agreed. This wasn't normal, and it certainly wasn't fake. By the following day, a science journalist from The Atlantic published a long-form investigation connecting the dots. Using old budget records, blacked-out procurement memos, and FOIA requests that had sat unanswered for years, she traced references to a long-defunded Air Force monitoring project. The name Blue Delta appeared in a 1991 audit document listed under Rural Infrastructure Monitoring Initiatives. It was the same name stamped on the rusting steel door beneath Sarah's barn. The fuse had been lit. 3 days after the upload, the government responded. At a hastily arranged press conference in Washington, a stone-faced Pentagon spokesperson stood behind a podium and acknowledged, for the first time, that certain rural observation installations had been maintained by the military during the Cold War era. He offered no specifics but confirmed their existence under the justification of strategic defense and geophysical research. No mention was made of Bennett Farm, no mention of Captain Archer. But to those who had been following the story, the message was clear. They knew. Sarah watched the press conference from her living room, Emma curled beside her on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, unaware of the significance unfolding. She felt no victory, only a cold unease. That evening, Marcus arrived with 2 other scientists, Dr. Elena Ruiz, a biogeochemist from Colorado, and Professor Neil Lawson, an expert in atmospheric chemistry. They came under aliases, traveling separately, and brought with them portable testing equipment, recording gear, and copies of Sarah's footage on encrypted drives. The kitchen table became a makeshift war room. "We've reviewed the spectral data from your footage," Elena said, opening her laptop. "The beam of light that touched your garden, it's not just visible spectrum. There are bands of electromagnetic radiation we've never seen used this way, targeted, controlled. It's like precision gene activation." "And the plant growth," Neil added. "It isn't just accelerated, it's stabilized. These tomatoes aren't just bigger, they have a more robust cellular structure. This isn't evolution, it's manipulation. Deliberate." Sarah sat back in her chair, folding her arms. "So, what are you saying? This is alien terraforming? Crop experiments?" Elena gave her a sober look. "We don't know, not yet, but someone, altered your land with an intelligence we don't understand." Marcus stood, holding a stack of printed documents. "That's why we're organizing the press event. Quiet, secure, invitation only. Independent journalists, international researchers, no governments. We can't let them bury this." Sarah exhaled slowly. The thought of speaking publicly, exposing herself and Emma to scrutiny, terrified her. But then she remembered Archer's final journal entry. "The land will protect the truth until someone ready to understand comes along." She had inherited this, not by choice, but by fate. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do it." The press event took place 3 nights later inside the restored barn, transformed into a sterile presentation room with folding chairs, blackout curtains, and mounted projectors. No live stream, no media circus, just truth. Sarah opened the event with a short statement. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she spoke. She told them about the tax auction, the strange bunker, the unexplained lights, and the astonishing transformation of her garden. She introduced Marcus and the others. Then she stepped aside. Elena and Neil presented the data: growth charts, DNA mutations, soil composition anomalies, time-stamped footage of aerial lights and plant transformation. At the end, Sarah returned to the front. She looked directly into the camera recording for future publication. "I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am a mother, an engineer, a woman who wanted to grow vegetables so her daughter could breathe clean air. And I found something no one expected. Not because I went looking for it, but because it found me. And I will not let it be buried." The room fell silent. Then applause broke out, slow, stunned, but real. By dawn, encrypted copies of the presentation were already in the hands of journalists from Europe, South America, and Southeast Asia. A digital petition began circulating, signed by scientists from 23 countries, demanding the release of all data related to the Blue Delta installations. The UN issued a cautious statement within the week, urging full cooperation from all relevant parties in any investigation involving environmental manipulation on sovereign territory. Sarah stood on her porch that morning watching Emma chase butterflies near the garden that glowed greener than it ever had. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt responsible. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. The letter arrived, folded in thirds, tucked unceremoniously into the rusted mailbox at the edge of the Bennett property. No postage, no return address, just Sarah's name, scrawled in block letters on the front. When she unfolded the page, her breath caught in her throat. "Stop while you still can. Last warning." The letters were printed in heavy black ink, as if someone had pressed too hard with the pen. No signature, no indication of who had written it. But the message was clear. Sarah stood motionless by the mailbox, the morning air sharp against her skin, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. Emma's laughter echoed from the porch. She was playing with Mr. Snuffles, her ever-loyal stuffed rabbit, completely unaware of the threat that had just landed on their doorstep. Sarah folded the letter, slid it into her jacket pocket, and forced a smile as she turned to walk back to the house. By late afternoon, Sarah had packed a small suitcase for Emma. She made the call to her old college roommate, Megan, now living in Kansas City, someone she trusted implicitly. Megan didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Of course, bring her." Emma didn't understand why they were driving so far on a school night, but Sarah told her it was a special trip, a chance to spend time with Aunt Megan and her golden retriever, Toby. Emma loved Toby. That was enough to soften the transition. As they drove, Sarah kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting another black SUV to appear. After settling Emma in and kissing her goodnight, Sarah lingered at the door. Megan stepped out onto the porch with her. "What kind of trouble are you really in, Sarah?" she asked quietly. "The kind that has no rule book," Sarah replied, "but I'm not running." Back at the farm, the house felt colder, emptier. The silence pressed in from the walls. Sarah powered up her laptop, logging into the internal camera network she and Marcus had installed throughout the property. Motion-triggered footage from the past 48 hours loaded. At 2:13 a.m. the night before, a shadow had passed near the south tree line. No headlights, no obvious vehicle. A figure, grainy and dark, had lingered by the greenhouse, then slipped away. Sarah forwarded the clip to Marcus with one line: "We have company." His reply came within minutes: "Meet me at the lab, now." The greenhouse at the agricultural research station was bathed in soft white light when Sarah arrived. Marcus paced near the entrance, eyes tired but sharp. "Someone tried to breach the external drive on the greenhouse server," he said before she could speak. "It failed, but it tells us two things. One, they know we have something valuable. Two, they know where to look." He motioned her inside. On a stainless steel table sat a glass Petri dish, a tiny sprout stretching toward the ceiling under a LED grow lights. "This," Marcus said, "was grown from a seed you pulled from the box marked Sector 3C. The genetic markers don't exist in any known plant taxonomy. It's not just modified, it's novel." Sarah stared at the sprout, delicate but pulsing with life. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever wants to silence you understands what you're sitting on, and it means we need help." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were clippings, emails, an old press badge. The name on it, Rachel Vaughn. Investigative journalist. She was chasing stories about Archer back in 2010, Marcus explained. She published 2 articles before going dark. I tracked her down last week. She wants to talk. Sarah flipped through the material, the pieces slowly assembling themselves into a portrait of a woman who had once stood at the edge of the same mystery. You trust her? Sarah asked. Marcus shrugged. I trust that she hates being lied to more than she fears consequences. They met Rachel in the corner booth of a quiet diner outside Jefferson City. She was older than the photo in her credentials, but her eyes were sharp and unreadable. A voice recorder sat in the center of the table, turned off. I don't need this on, she said. Yet. Sarah and Marcus took turns walking her through the past few weeks. The hidden door, the underground lab, the soil anomalies, the visitations. Rachel listened in silence. They shut me down back then, she said finally. I had a source inside the Department of Energy. She disappeared. I got letters like you did, threats. My editor pulled the plug, and I got the message. But Archer was onto something. Sarah leaned forward. Then help us bring it back. If we do this together, we can protect each other. They can't silence all of us. Rachel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn notebook. I kept everything. Every name, every location, every anomaly. I always believed there would be a moment to bring it back to the surface. Maybe this is it. She looked at them both. But make no mistake, once we go forward, we can't go back. Not legally, not safely. Sarah thought of Emma, now asleep in a warm house far from here. She thought of Archer's journal, of the light in the sky, of the land that pulsed with something ancient and watching. Then we go forward, she said. No more hiding. That night, back on the farm, the winds shifted. Clouds rolled in over the tree line. Sarah checked the perimeter cameras again. At 1:04 a.m., motion sensors were triggered near the chicken coop. She threw on a coat and boots and stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight and a revolver she'd borrowed from Marcus. The beam of light swept over the fields. Nothing. Until a rustle from behind the barn. Sarah moved slowly, deliberately. Her pulse thundered in her ears. A figure darted across the shadows. She shouted, "Stop! I have a weapon!" No response. She raised the flashlight and fired a single warning shot into the air. The crack of the bullet split the night. A loud alarm began blaring from inside the house. Emma had set it up before she left, insisting it made her feel safer knowing it was there. The intruder turned and ran, disappearing into the tree line before she could get a good look. Sarah stood in the silence that followed, heart pounding, breath visible in the cold. The letter had been right. They'd had their last warning, and now the real fight had begun. The morning air was thick with anticipation. A light breeze stirred the tall grass that surrounded the Bennett farm, now freshly mowed and carefully prepared for what would be the most important event in Sarah's life. A folding podium stood beneath the shade of a massive oak tree, its weathered branches stretching protectively over the main barn. Rows of chairs lined the lawn in neat formation, and a camera crew from an independent news outlet adjusted tripods and lighting panels, their expressions taut with purpose. Sarah stood off to the side, her palms slightly clammy despite the cool air. The past few months had upended her world in ways she never thought possible, but today, this moment, felt like a line in the dirt. A declaration. She was done hiding. In the crowd were faces she had come to trust. Marcus Chen, calm and steady as always, adjusting the collar of his shirt beneath a tweed blazer. Rachel Vaughn, sharp-eyed and relentless, stood beside a rolling case of documents, each one a thorn meant to pierce decades of secrecy. A handful of scientists from Marcus's informal coalition were there too, along with a few local farmers, curious neighbors, and people from as far as California and Vermont who had driven cross-country after Sarah's anonymous footage went viral. The video had shattered containment. What began as a simple infrared recording of unexplained aerial phenomena had cascaded into one of the most explosive debates in modern science. Fringe researchers, military veterans, whistleblowers, and journalists had all stepped out of the shadows. And today, the world was watching. Sarah stepped up to the podium, the mic attached to her lapel hissing softly before falling quiet. a red light blinked on the main broadcast camera. Live. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she began, voice steady despite the weight of it all. "I'm not a scientist by training, and I never set out to expose anyone. I bought this property last spring, hoping to give my daughter a fresh start. What I found underneath this land, and above it, changed my life." She took a breath, scanning the crowd. "But this isn't just my story. It's the story of a man named Captain Raymond Archer, of a facility buried beneath this soil, of data collected and hidden for decades, of technology and biology that defy what we thought was possible." Behind her, a large monitor flickered on, displaying the three-dimensional star map Sarah and Marcus had uncovered. Then came the grainy but unmistakable video of the light descending upon the garden, illuminating the plants that would grow to harvest size within days. "This land," Sarah said, "was selected. Not by me, maybe not even by the people who built the facility here, but it's special, and it's been special for a long time." Rachel stepped forward next, her tone journalistic and controlled, but her eyes fierce. "In 2010, she said, Captain Archer submitted a formal request to the Department of Defense to declassify a portion of his research, citing the humanitarian and ecological value of his findings. He was denied. A year later, he was dead. His private correspondence, however, tells a very different story." She pulled out a folder and held it up. "These documents, authenticated by multiple experts, show Archer was prepared to go public. He believed the data belonged to humanity. And now, finally, we are fulfilling that legacy." Marcus followed, standing beside Sarah and Rachel with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his words would shake the pillars of accepted science. "Our independent analysis of the soil and plant matter from the Bennett farm reveals a biological environment unlike any other recorded in the continental United States," he said. "We've observed accelerated plant growth, abnormal microbial ecosystems, and mineral compositions with no match in existing agricultural databases." He clicked a remote. Graphs, microscope images, and time-lapse footage of the garden's growth populated the screen. "This is not a natural anomaly. It is the result of exposure to a controlled intelligent force, one that interacted with the environment repeatedly over decades. Our data, collected under rigorous conditions, suggests a level of environmental manipulation that surpasses any known Earth-based technology." The murmurs among the audience grew louder. A few scientists nodded. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The cameras captured every word, every image, and streamed them in real time to millions of viewers online. Then came the final blow. Rachel walked to the side of the stage and revealed a banner reading, "The Bennett Center for Interdisciplinary Research." "The facility below us is no longer dormant," Sarah said, voice clear. "Thanks to the work of Captain Archer and the collaboration of scientists like Dr. Chen and others, it will now be repurposed. We are launching an independent research program, open, transparent, and dedicated to truth, to understanding what this land means, what it can teach us." The crowd erupted into applause, and not long after, the story made its way to Capitol Hill. Within 72 hours, congressional representatives began issuing statements. Some called for restraint, others demanded answers. But the public wasn't satisfied with caution. The pressure was too loud, too fast, too organized. The footage had gone viral on every major platform. Hashtags like Bennett Revelation, Blue Delta Truth, and Archer Files trended globally for days. A week later, a bipartisan motion passed in the House of Representatives calling for the establishment of an independent investigation task force into classified research facilities related to non-terrestrial environmental influences. But Sarah was already one step ahead. With Emma safely back home and the garden thriving more than ever, she had taken full leadership of the Bennett Center. The underground facility had been cleaned, reinforced, and partially opened for visiting researchers, all sworn to non-disclosure only as it related to security protocols, not truth. Emma, curious as ever, spent her afternoons observing lab instruments and asking questions that made the postdocs smile and scramble for answers. One evening, as Sarah sat with her daughter beneath the same oak tree where the press conference had taken place, she watched the twilight deepen into that now familiar hush. "Do you think they're watching us?" Emma asked, looking up at the stars. I think they always were, Sarah said softly. But now, we're watching back. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light shimmered along the horizon. Not a drone, not a plane, just a pulse, a gentle acknowledgement. And for the first time, the keeper of this land didn't feel like a trespasser in someone else's story. She felt like the next chapter. She was no longer hiding. She was carrying the flame. If you're still here after this story, if your pulse quickened with Sarah's, if you held your breath when the lights appeared, or felt the weight of her choice to stand against silence, then you already know. This isn't just fiction. It's a mirror, a reflection of every quiet voice that was told to stop asking questions, of every mother, farmer, teacher, or engineer who stumbled into something they weren't meant to find, something too strange, too buried, or too dangerous for the world to accept without permission. But here's the truth. We don't need permission to wonder. We don't need clearance to be curious. And sometimes, the most extraordinary changes start in the most ordinary places, with a patch of dirt, a daughter's garden, and a woman who chose not to look away. If this story moved you, if it made you feel like you were standing with Sarah at that underground vault, or staring into the sky with a question burning in your chest, then tell us. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in her shoes? What do you believe is still out there, beneath our feet or above our heads? This channel isn't just about storytelling. It's about you, the community we're building, the stories we're uncovering, and the truths that refuse to stay hidden. So, if you believe in truth seekers, in people who carry the flame, not because they asked to, but because no one else would, then don't just watch. Stand with us. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one. Turn on notifications so you're first to know when our next chapter drops, because there will be more. Sarah's story may have reached a turning point, but what lies ahead is even more compelling. A scientist buried in scandal, a hidden network of facilities across the Midwest, a storm coming that no one sees, yet. And we'll be here, week by week, piece by piece, uncovering it with you. Because sometimes, the only way to fight darkness is to shine a brighter light. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.